Today, we'll feature district leaders who have created civic engagement experiences for students in their districts and have co-created these opportunities with students and have ensured their leadership in the learning process. We hope today's discussion will be free of glitches, but if you do need any help, feel free to use the question feature and a member of our staff will be with you. We are honored to be joined today by representatives from two districts that have created student-led civic engagement programs that center students and their communities. First, we have Christina Ross from Baltimore City Public Schools. Christina is the program manager of Blueprint Initiatives, which include Bmore Me. And from Chicago Public Schools, we have Heather Van Benthuysen, who is the executive director of the Department of Social Studies and Civic Engagement at Chicago Public Schools. She'll talk to us about educating for democracy. Once again, my name is Nicole Brisbane, and I am a project director on staff at CPRL at Columbia. Thank you to our guests, and we're excited to hear from them in a moment. Here's how we'll spend our time today. We will start by discussing why student-led civic engagement is important right now and our working definition of this concept. Next, we'll hear from our panelists on how they work at the district level to help schools and teachers create opportunities for student-led civic engagement. And then we'll invite you to ask any questions that you have. And as those questions come up, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box at any time so that we can be sure to get to them. We'll close out today with a preview of our next two webinars that we hope you'll join us for. All right. There have been numerous events in the past few years that have created a critical moment for American civic engagement. Leading up to and following the 2016 election, Americans across the political spectrum realized the importance of democratic participation at the federal, state, and local levels. Young Americans increased their political participation as well, reflecting a trend researchers have been studying. For instance, the Circle Center at Tufts University, which is a nonpartisan, independent research organization focused on U.S. youth civic engagement, estimated that between 52 to 55% of young voters aged 18 to 29 voted in 2020, which is up approximately 20% from the 2016 election. Some educators, researchers, and leaders alike are now wondering, how well are we preparing young people to be civically engaged? And what is the role of schools in preparing students to be civically engaged? Of course, the government classes many of us took in high school expose us to the democratic processes in our country, but typically they do not prepare students to be actively engaged in those processes or understand how they can participate. In speaking with people like our panelists today, along with researchers, we see student-led civic engagement as one way to help students build 21st century skills and actively engage in democracy as they become adults. There is not, however, a working definition of student-led civic engagement, but we've developed a working one that we will share with you today. So let's begin with civic engagement. This concept involves both civic engagement and student-led learning, which we'll get to next. But according to Thomas Ehrlich, one of the nation's experts in this area, civic engagement is working to make a difference in the civic life of one's community and developing the knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make that difference. It means promoting the quality of life in a community through both political and non-political processes. Civic engagement can include staying politically informed, voting in political action, volunteering and serving one's community, or involvement in a policy change at any level. Our second concept is student-led learning. Student-led teaching and learning is an innovative form of active learning that empowers students with direct ownership of the learning experience. It allows for learner autonomy, builds deeper engagement and investment in content, engages different learning styles, and builds student leadership and voice. So when we put these two concepts together, we can think of student-led civic engagement as learning opportunities where students are acquiring the knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make a difference in their community by leading on issues and work that are important to them. We've called this a working definition because it is not pulled from one source, rather one that has been formed based on multiple sources of research and our conversations with people doing this work. Student-led civic engagement can be learning about different branches of local government. For example, what does my city council do? It can mean building an investment in your local community, developing deeper knowledge of local history and issues, and or advocating for a policy change, like the need for a stop sign to make a community safer. It can occur in a social studies or other subject area classrooms as part of an interdisciplinary or project-based approach to teaching and learning. It can occur outside the classroom in school-based programs and after-school clubs. Before we turn it over to our panelists to talk about what student-led civic engagement looks like in their districts and for their students, it's important to note that there are some real benefits of this type of engagement. Learning scientists argue that young people master math, reading, and science much better if they have an educational experience that develops their social and emotional learning competencies, like self-awareness and relationship skills, which puts academic learning in a larger, more meaningful context. Students retain more academic knowledge because they are playing an active role in the learning process, generating ideas rather than being passive receivers of information. I'm eager for you to hear from our panelists about why they prioritize this work, but here are a few additional benefits from the research. Civically engaged students developed higher order skills, including critical thinking, writing, communication, math, and technology at more advanced levels. Students who participate in civic engagement have increased emotional intelligence, including the ability to collaborate across diverse perspectives and a sense of self-efficacy for positively impacting individuals, organizations, and communities. I'd like to highlight this last point about diversity and equity. Student-led civic engagement benefits everyone involved. Students, teachers, and community members who get the opportunity to understand more about each other's perspectives and priorities. For schools that are working on integration specifically, this can be an integral part of the strategy to build culturally responsive and sustaining teaching. All right, we'd love to turn it over to our panelists. Please remember to use the chat to share your questions about student-led civic engagement or to share what this looks like in your classroom, school, and district. We'd love to hear from you throughout this conversation. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so we can see our wonderful panelists. All right, here we are. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to welcome our experts to the conversation. We have Christina Ross from Baltimore City Public Schools and Heather Benthuysen of Chicago Public Schools. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Why don't we go ahead and get started with introductions? Christina, I'd love for you to kick us off by sharing a bit about your title and how you came into your current role.
Great. First of all, thanks, Kimberly, Nicole, Heather, for inviting me to be on this panel, and Heather for joining me on the panel, and for everyone who's joining us and watching and learning with us. My name is Christina Ross. I'm the program manager for Blueprint Initiatives in Baltimore City Public Schools. I will be sharing a lot more about Bmore Me, which is one of the primary initiative on which I work in my role. I came here, my career path was not, my trajectory was a little different. I started my career in the Senate, working for Senator Paul Wellstone and Senator Tammy Baldwin when she was representing the 2nd District of Wisconsin. I worked on education issues and felt that my passion was really civic engagement and involving young people in the process. So I went and got my master's to teach, and I taught for what ended up being 12 and a half years. I taught in Prince William County, Virginia for 7 of those, and then in Baltimore City for the rest of my teaching career. And then in At the start of the 2018 school year, I transitioned to the district and supported the launch of our Be More Me work, which I'll talk about in 2018-19, and then took over as program manager. We didn't at the start, we didn't have a program manager in the summer of 2019, which I might be getting those dates wrong because dates seem really, really hard right now. It seems like a year is like a century, and then a day goes by real fast though. And yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Christina, and thanks for joining us. Heather, do you want to share next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Heather Van Benthuysen. I'm really grateful to be here, and thanks for the Center for Public Research and Leadership for organizing these events. I think having national conversations around what it means to commit to civic learning and civic engagement is so critically important. And I think the more folks we have elevating important questions like this and discussions like this, the better. And colleagues like, Baltimore and Christina, who are leading the way in this work, always grateful to connect to them and you all here because you're interested. I think it says a lot, speaks to how I ended up here too. So similar to Christina, I was a teacher in CPS for 13 years. I'm a bit of a unicorn in my role as director of social science because I was an English teacher, but the English teacher that I was and the school leader that I was really driven by this idea of how do we not only elevate and connect with students as co-learners and leaders in the school, but how do we continue to challenge ourselves to make sure that we're living up to the mission of public schools to prepare an informed and engaged citizenry. And I think at the root of all of that for me was what we all want to do is make sure that what we're teaching students matters to them, that they understand what they're learning matters in the world, that what they're learning about will help them in their lives in a meaningful way. And I've learned over the years, there's no better way to do that than through a civic learning pedagogy. I did leave the classroom. I studied to be a school leader, principal, but that took me to more of a nonprofit space. I left the district for a short while and worked for a nonprofit in a national setting, working with districts around the country and training and coaching teachers around civic learning. And it was our district's mission, and frankly, our leader, Dr. Jackson, who really called me back to the district because what we're committed to and trying to do is what I believe in, is what will help what ails schools. So I've been now in central office and district role for 6 years, and really proud and grateful of the things that our district is trying to do and figure out.
Awesome. Welcome, ladies. Heather, I also started my career in the classroom as a reading teacher, and I was probably similar to you, one of those teachers that was constantly supplementing my scripted curriculum with newspaper articles from what was happening around the community and song lyrics that I knew my students were listening to, so that we could do some of that civic engagement in our ELA class as well. So I'm excited to facilitate the conversation today and for folks to learn more about the programs that you all manage. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen so that Christina, you can share a little bit about Be More Me with us.
Great, thanks, Nicole.
Let me go ahead and get this back up here.
So I'm excited to share the, oh great, thanks. The various pieces of Be More Me. Be More Me is grounded and centered in our curriculum, which lives in our social studies department, social studies content. We built, so I'm going to kind of start from the left and go right rather than top down. So we launched Be More Me in the 2018-19 school year as a pilot with 6 teachers who wrote Be More Me units, which are 3-week community responsive, literacy rich social studies units that are aligned to the state standards and live within the social studies, the larger social studies curriculum. We started it, like I said, in 2018. We found that we launched it a little bit late in the year and found teachers were really excited about it. However, wanted a earlier launch. And so we spent the summer of 2019 building out the units to actually go from 6th to 11th grade with some thought to vertical integration of the units, where students are starting in the 6th grade with Who Deserves a Monument, and then going up to kind of looking at Baltimore City in a more global setting in world history, which they typically see in 11th grade in our districts. And so these units are inquiry driven around a compelling question and allow students to really explore themselves, their identity, their beliefs in the context of our cities and our nation's rich and complex past, present, and future. One of the things that we learned last year, and we heard from many teachers, is that 3 weeks just wasn't enough time. It sometimes felt, in some places, it felt like not as embedded into the year-long curriculum. And in general, students were really responding and engaged to this opportunity to learn the state standards in this relevant and engaging way that allowed students to build relationships with their peers, with their teachers, and empowered students. And so this year we piloted a year-long Be More Me curriculum. We have 13 teachers who are building the curriculum that is, again, aligned to the state standards and divided up into 6 inquiries and kind of modeled in the same way that the units are, but a little bit more grounded in the, or driven a little bit more grounded in the standards, because it is a year-long course. And so, not that they're both grounded in the standards, I guess I'm talking over myself. And so then one of the other things with Be More Me, so we, in the classroom, students are getting this really rich opportunity to explore their identity, to have voice and choice. But we really wanted to break down the now virtual walls between the classroom and our community. And so this past year, well, actually last year, we launched a Be More Me Club. This year, we partnered it with what we launched is what we're calling the Youth Ambassadors, which actually sits not in social studies, but in our Office of Family and Community Engagement, where we have youth ambassadors and students in the Be More Me Club using the tools of improvement science to understand their school. They were doing empathy interviews with their students, with their peers. They used a youth truth survey to understand how students were experiencing school. And then they're designing an impact project, which they shared with our district leadership on Monday evening, and we'll be sharing with our district at our student showcase. We also really want to make sure that students have the opportunity to learn with and from members of our community. And so we launched, we've done a Be More Me speaker series. Before the pandemic, it was in person. Now it is virtual, where we create panels that are aligned to the Be More Me units and bring in artists, policymakers, leading thinkers, professors, all these leaders from our city to share, for example, how we as individuals can contribute to the betterment of Baltimore, as an example. And then lastly, again, grounded in the Be More Me curriculum, this year we launched a Be More Me student fellowship. Like I said, our 6th grade unit is around who deserves a monument. And one of the things that we are grappling with in our district, just like districts across the country, is like who we name our schools after, and do the names honor and reflect our values. in our district. And so our Bmore Me student fellows are actually at the foundation of this work, which we just launched in January district-wide. So they've been doing historical research with partners from Enoch Pratt on all the people for whom our schools are named after. Baltimore is really unique. We have about 2/3 of our schools that are named after people are named after Baltimoreans, some of whom are very big names, you know, like Frederick Douglass, and some probably lesser known, like Teresa Marshburn, who was the crossing guard at the school for 17 years. And so the students are using the skills that they learn in Be More Me and in social studies to do the historical research. We're grounding the conversations that we have around who deserves a school name in these ideas that exist in the units. The students actually created a criteria that we shared with the school board around who, what our criteria should be. And their work is setting a foundation for further community conversations about school names. So that is Be More Me in a nutshell. I think I took a little too much airtime, so I'm gonna pass the mic back over.
That was great. Thanks, Christina. I really enjoyed learning about, you know, the community-centric aspect of Be More Me when we had our first conversation. So thanks for sharing that. Heather, why don't you tell us about CPS?
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. So I think what I'm going to do is start talking about a little bit about the history of the work in CPS, which is really long-standing. We've had a commitment to civic engagement and student voice in some shape or form since, 2012. And I think it's really evolved over the years thanks to a robust group of partners that we have, local and national partners, and funders and funding support, particularly through the McCormick Foundation, who's really helped us to shepherd and grow this over the years and slowly take it on as a district to now where we have a department of social science and civic engagement and a civic engagement manager and student voice specialist, which are things that are really unique around the country. And so I think starting what I'm going to be sharing with you today in honoring the foundation that was required to build this, I think is really important to name, because I know there's probably a lot of district leaders on the call today. And so some of the things I'm going to be talking about might seem to be a bit far out of the reach right now. But I do think that the kind of foundational pieces that are required to do this work is what I'm going to focus on speaking to today. So first, we have a commitment to civic learning and civic engagement in two places. So first, civics education. Civics education is what we would name a civics course, for example. So what we have in CPS is a course called Participate Civics, which is a semester or year-long course that is required, a graduation requirement in high school and also now in elementary school, which we put it in 8th grade. And I think, you know, what Christine was speaking to is, I think, the importance of quality curriculum through Be More Me, for example, and teachers need those kind of curricular resources to do this work. We firmly believe that curriculum should be designed in partnership with and for the communities in which it's taught. And so, you know, I really appreciated, Christine, you mentioning that the student-generated criteria and the kind of ways in which you're engaging students in developing that curriculum, it's so important. And with Participate Civics, that was a huge part of that work, where we've had now 3 revisions, thanks to student feedback, teacher feedback, where we can honestly say that it's a curriculum created for Chicago's youth. And it's unique in that it's a culturally responsive and sustaining civics curriculum. So we're really proud of that. There's training for teachers, cohort model where teachers are trained throughout the year. There's events and partnerships. We have a partnership that enriches the course with our city clerk, also groups like the Aspen Institute. So we're very proud of that. And I think it's important that you lay that foundation, because it's really important for civic engagement to be successful and for students to have agency and be empowered, that they understand structures of government, that they have you know, that basic knowledge. So it is foundational, it is critical, and it is something that we have prioritized and developed now over the last 6 years. We're very proud of that. And then the other side of it in the foundational work is on civic learning. So the best way I think I can explain this is that, and I mentioned this in my intro, that public schools have a calling, right, to prepare not just an informed citizenry, and I say small c citizenry, but an active and powerful citizenry. And there's no way that we can really do that and prepare students to participate in our democracy in undemocratic systems, right? We need to have schools and classrooms model and practice those kind of civic knowledge, habits, and dispositions that we want to make sure model and develop the competencies that we want to see in students, especially if we're talking about taking action or working for justice or analyzing and developing solutions to address systemic issues. That means there's deeper learning is required, and that means it's a 360-degree approach. So when we talk about civic learning, we're talking about nurturing and modeling and practicing participatory democracy in all aspects of schooling, and that everyone is accountable to that. It's not just social science teachers. It is not just a civics course, but it is all of us every day, all of the time, from the very top to kindergartners to families. And so over the years, we've really learned more about what our community needs and what we are aspiring to achieve, thanks to things like our research partners, to learning more deeply through the Participate Civics course, but also programs like student voice committees, which have been around now for a very long time. They're school level student leadership groups that work in partnership with the school administration to solve school-based issues. They basically work to make sure that the student voices in the school are elevated and part of decision making. We've scaled those, so now there's 93 high schools in CPS, 89 of them have student voice committees, and we're now, we have many elementary schools, over 400. Right now we're at about 150 of our elementary schools have student voice committees. So that is a continued part of our work that we've learned so much from. The other thing that we've learned a lot from is service learning. So in CPS, back in the day when I started, decades ago, service learning was hours-based, where students were required to complete 40 hours to graduate. That was changed. CPS changed that to be project-based. So now there's 2 projects to graduate. One happens in civics, the one can happen in any other course. And they're civic learning projects that are rooted in course content. So it's not an extra or nice to have, but it's a way to apply classroom learning in a real, meaningful, and experiential way that's connected to students' lived experiences and their communities directly. And we have someone who manages that work and leads that work for the district. So this over the years has really brought us to where we are today, which 2 years ago, we embarked on a new journey because the district has changed its vision to prepare all students for college, career, and civic life. And we really wanted to take a refresh and pause and understand, what do we mean by civic life? How do you practice civic life as a district? And what are the quality expectations and the ways in which we can do that and support schools in aspiring to a more democratic education? And you can go to the next slide, Nicole. And so the outcome of that work, which is about 750 CPS stakeholders, including partners, parents, students, and teachers and principals, is that we define civic life. So for us, civic life is the definition is a question of how shall we live together, and the aspiration for that question. And then we also identified what we call civic life lenses and practices. So the core practices are not specific to social science, although they are part of social science and it's a critical part, but core practices that can be leveraged in every classroom, every content area, grades K through 12, but also core practices for the folks that have decision-making power, whether it's principals and teachers or central office staff or partners. And these are research-based practices that we are really leveraging to not only make sure that schools are have a pathway to aspire and develop these practices in their schools and classrooms, but also partners connected to the practices and quality criteria or competencies connected to the practices. So these practices are embedded now as part of the way in which our schools self-evaluate, which in CPS, it's called the School Effectiveness Framework. The school effectiveness framework is criteria that schools evaluate themselves on and use to inform their own strategic plans for improvement every year. And so student voice and civic life is one of those components of that quality criteria that schools are held accountable to. And I think the flip side with the civic life lenses, that came out of this idea that we used to talk about student voice as a separate thing, right? And the problem with that is that student voice became sometimes a box to check. Well, we have a student voice committee, therefore we have student voice. But we really see student voice as something that lives and breathes in all aspects of our work and schooling, and there's ways to do that. So the civic life lenses are the ways in which we look at our work to inform and shape how we practice and educate for democracy. So for example, I'll name educating through inquiry, which you'll see that there, it's the third practice. And that's been around forever, right? Constructivist teaching has been around for a really long time, but you can certainly facilitate inquiry and teach inquiry in a way that's not rooted in social, political, economic, or environmental issues or topics or pedagogies. And so what the civic life lenses do is they help us to shift our thinking into educating for democracy, where if we're educating through inquiry, are we always elevating and centering the identity of our students and the communities in which they live? And how are we doing that throughout the inquiry from beginning to the end? How, through the facilitation of this inquiry, are we making space for students to use their voice, to elevate their practice, their expertise, and their knowledge as part of that inquiry? Because our students are assets and they bring a lot to the classroom to learning, and those assets in a lot of ways are civic knowledge. And so how do we bring those into the inquiry as well? And then how does that inquiry practice participatory democracy and model that? What are the ways in which you can use strategies or routines or resources that help students to practice and develop those skills? And then finally, is the inquiry taking a critical approach, right? Are we practicing criticality? Are we making sure that students through this inquiry have a way to investigate and interrogate and think about social and political, environmental, or economic topics or issues? So that's an example of the way the lenses work. As far as the practices go, there's some of these things we have really developed. So taking an action through experiential learning, we have our own framework, we have training, we have like a partnerships plan, and it's very robust and we're really excited about it. And we have a lot of key partners there. Some of these spaces are still in development. So discussion and deliberation, I think, is one of the most important ways in which we can practice civic life every day, but it's also one of the more challenging places. And teachers, we're asking teachers to, in CPS, we have predominantly white teachers teaching predominantly students of color. And when teachers are talking about issues, social, political issues, oftentimes they need better training, skills, resources, and connections to help do that in a way that's meaningful, that elevates and honors students' lived experiences and creates those safe, nurturing, and belonging environments that we need so students can engage in critical discourse. So we have really key partners for that, like Street Law, for example, is going to be training all of our 8th grade teachers in deliberation. And we're working with Harvard and Mira Levinson and her ethical dilemmas to help build the competencies of the adults in our district to have these conversations with one another, not as teachers, but as teams, right? Around how biases inform the decisions that we make every single day. So it's a 360-degree approach. We just started this vision this year, and we've got a lot of things moving, but we're really excited. It feels right. And I think when I look at the powerful practices, what I see is this is how we teach and educate for equity, how we, when we think about culturally responsive teaching, these are the things that we want to see. So yeah, that's a quick summary of where we are.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'm sure folks were able to learn lots about what's happening in and across CPS with some pretty exciting shifts in approach to this work. Both of you mentioned the concept of student voice in your overview of the program, and I think it's one of the more powerful concepts here. How do you engage student voice in a legitimate and authentic way, rather than it being sort of a box checked way? Christina, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. And I think it sounds, it's really exciting to be on a panel with Heather again, because I think we're very aligned, and our districts are very aligned in this rich and deep commitment to making sure that students are authentically involved in a variety of decisions and in all decisions that impact their lives. For us, as I've talked about in the Be More Me curriculum, we provide a lot of support, or the curriculum provides a lot of support and space for students to elevate their voice in the classroom as they're grappling with these compelling questions and complicated and nuanced discussions and debates and things like that. That's kind of like at its core and its foundation, it's making sure that students have that opportunity in the curriculum. But in our district, we are building and committed to building all these other opportunities for students to have real meaningful voice. And I think Heather said something about like students, you know, like a lot of times it's common that people are like, oh, we need student voice. Let's invite one student on this panel. And the student has no prep, right? Like, because it's just like, come after school and talk about what you think about, you know, school or something like that. And we've been really working in the district to make sure that we're embedding student voice in a lot of the decision making. We have a youth engagement specialist whose job is focused on ensuring that students are engaged in decision making in our district. He leads the Youth Ambassador program, which I've supported. But we also do things like, for example, our school board was looking into our search and seizure policy in the district. And so we had a town hall that my colleague Rashad Staten, the youth engagement specialist, led. And then I went into social studies classrooms, and we both did presentations on the policy and breaking down what the policy is and isn't, right? Breaking down what we have control over versus what like state and federal law has control over, and then asked students to weigh in on those areas, and shared the avenues where maybe we can't control, but if you don't like this, this is to whom and how you can impact change at the state and federal level. So that's like one example. I talked a lot about our naming work, which is another example where students are at the ground level and in really meaningful conversations. And then when we think about student voice, kind of that's like in our community and in our district, we also have the Youth Ambassador program that I talked about, where students they're learning the tools to capture their colleagues' voices, and then to examine and understand a problem based on what they hear from their peers, to then create an impact project, which we have support from some philanthropic partners to help fund. Because another thing that often happens is we're like, well, what do we do to fix it, students? And they come up with ideas, but we don't have any resources behind it. And so we can't act on their ideas. And so then we're giving this message to students that like, you're not heard, or your idea isn't valued because of that. And so, so we're actually making sure that we're empowering students to identify a problem, come up with a solution, and the resources they need to influence and impact that solution. And then our goal is these students, their ideas, they're going to test them, iterate on them, and then we'll share them with other schools in the district. So, so in theory, a school that could start at one school at Armistead Garden could actually spread to many other schools if the students in those schools decide they like that. And then lastly, I will say, one thing that I didn't introduce when I was talking about our year-long curriculum is we actually have teachers writing it, and then we had a group of teachers, 7 teachers, who were implementing it in the classroom. And throughout their implementation, they were capturing student voice and experience on the curriculum that they were implementing to then inform the writing. It got a little messy because what was designed to be in person ended up virtual. And so sometimes like lessons that were paced for an in-person classroom didn't pace quite as well in a virtual classroom and things like that. But we, our student engagement teacher fellows were doing empathy interviews with their students. We held focus groups. We did surveys. We actually tested out some change ideas on student engagement based on some data that we got from the PERTS survey. And we kind of consolidated all of that learning. And now the teachers are working on revising the curriculum and incorporating those things that they heard from students who were actually experiencing it to then improve the curriculum, which we'll be piloting next year in person, hopefully all in person.
I know the pandemic came in and ruined all of our plans, didn't it? Heather, I heard you mention the student voice committees. Can you talk a little bit more about those?
Sure. And I think the student voice committees are very powerful and have been something that's really not only planted a lot of the seeds of change with school leaders and teachers on the role of students in school decision making, but they've also really elevated the challenges that come with this. Because I think, Nicole, that question that you pose about student voice is probably the most critical question around how do we build these democratic schools. So student voice committees are small groups of students. They're not like student government where they are elected or selected. In fact, when we train teachers and principals to introduce student voice committees into their school, we coach them in choosing non-traditional leaders, right? And making sure that the students that serve on the student voice committee are representative of the entire student body. And a lot of schools use them in different ways, but essentially we have a curriculum and training and supports to help those students work in partnership with administration on addressing school-based issues. Sometimes the students are working on issues that are not priorities for principals. Sometimes the principals say, hey, I really need help in this issue area or this topic, and the students work in collaboration with them, identify solutions, and even enact solutions. And so this has been going on for many years. We've had some incredible leaders in the district. Christina Salgado led a lot of this work for many years. And I think ultimately the outcome of that is really identifying the biggest challenges with student voice and the recent solutions that we've come up with for not just student voice committees, which are one group in the school, but the whole school itself. So, because at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is shifting adultism. Adultism is very real and alive and present in our schools and in all of us. It's a bias that we all carry, especially because we learn to do school within a hierarchy, right? There are those in charge, and there are those with power, and there are those without power. And so how are we shifting our thinking from power over to power with? And the systems and structures like student voice committees are so critically important to help that culture change. So we use a model of student voice that's been informed by a lot of research from the past, like Quaglia and Toshalis and Nakula, the spectrum of student voice. But I think in essence, what it comes down to is the first tier has to be about listening. So whether it's a student voice committee and your relationship with them, or if it's your students in your classroom, or if you're a principal and it's your whole school, what are the systems and structures that you have in place for listening? How are you making space, public space, transparent space, where students know that you are listening meaningfully, intentionally, and authentically first? Then once you have that built, then how and where are you making it clear that you are learning from and with your students? And do they know what you are learning from them and how you are using it? And that transparency is so critical. And then from there, how are you making space for students to lead? Because not everyone in a school, if you've got 1,000 students in your school, not everyone can be leaders all of the time. But there has to be a place where in every single experience of a student's day, whether it's in a classroom project or in school-wide decision-making, they see pathways for that leadership and open opportunities. And I think when we talk about student voice, oftentimes that's what folks think about is like our students enacting solutions to problems, our students choosing the books they read or informing curriculum. And a lot of those things very much are part of student voice, but I feel like they defeat folks a lot of the time because it feels almost unattainable. Like, how do you get there? And it's not one way and it's not one practice. It's a spectrum of ways. And it's about what you value, what you prioritize, and how you position and see yourself in relation to youth and young people. And I think the last thing I'll say about this, what's underneath all of that is how do you see and value your young people as assets, right? They're not these empty vessels for us to fill. They bring with them a wealth of experience, identity, values, knowledge that can and should be leveraged in the classroom. And so when we even use the word voice, what do we mean by that? And really as educators, pushing ourselves to pause and challenge and question ourselves about the biases that might be shaping our answers to that question. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
No, Heather, I just wanted to build on that because I think the point you're making is so powerful. A lot of times we say student voice and that we put, it's almost like a passive for the adults, but in reality, as adults, we need to create systems and mindsets and structures where students' voices are heard. It's great when we give students seats at the table, but the people at the table need to be listening to them and respect and have that mindset needed to act on what they're hearing from them. And I think that's like student voice 2.0, right? Like, is that really giving students voice and the agency that to act on and move systems and things that need to move as a result of it. And that is to go back to what Heather has talked about with like creating a active and engaged citizenry. That won't just improve our schools and classrooms, that will improve our civic life, because then those students that feel like they have agency in their schools and in their communities will become, they are citizens, and they will become voting citizens when they like when they turn 18 and hopefully affect the change that needs to change in our country so that we have a real democracy, functional democracy.
Nice clarification on the functional democracy piece. Kimberly, do we have time for one question maybe from the chat?
I think so. I hope so. Yeah, we have a couple of questions that have come in. I think this most recent one might be a nice way to wrap up for today. So this question is from Sarah, and it is, what lessons have you learned over time that districts who are just getting started in leading their own civic engagement efforts, what they can learn from? So I can repeat that again. If you're thinking about districts who are just starting this work, what advice would you give them based on what you have learned?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a really, really great question. So I'm going to do like a stream of consciousness, and here's what first comes to mind, because I think in my experience as a teacher, school leader, external partner, and now in the district, that we often look for a thing to do, right? So here's a curriculum I need to adopt. Here's a partner I need to bring in here, something like that. And I feel like that's what we need to flip. Because if you really want to develop a civic engagement strategy, then you need to model civic engagement, which is to engage your community. So, in involving your community, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. And anyone who wants like tips or things that we've done in the past that have not worked or worked, feel free to email me. But I do think that it has to be a community effort, and it has to involve students and the folks that are there, because I will name, like, there's a lot of really great partners out there, like national partners who everyone knows of. But I think what we're also missing is that civics is community-based. Civics is local. And there are so many local partners who might not even work in the civic space that can help you and contribute to your goals. And I think because civics is also personal, that you have, and you want to get buy-in, and it's also, the civic learning is unfortunately being politicized, right? Like right now. So being able to name with your community, what are your core values, they're going to drive all of that. So no matter what comes up, which Diana Hess says, there's no democracy without controversy. If you're doing democracy, you will have controversy, and that's a good thing you need to lean into. But in order to weather those storms, you need to have shared core values that you can keep coming back to, because that's the way that you problem solve together. You go through those storms with those core values. So once you have that foundation built, then you can identify, because also the challenge with partners too is not all of them you can scale. At least a district our size, it's hard to scale. So if you have those core values and that core strategy, then you can work with partners, and the partners know how to adapt for you and what you're looking for, which in essence is what helps to make something sustainable at scale too.
Christina.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It really, to start off, it has to be grounded in the ideas of democracy, which are community engagement, and certainly asking students and teachers to be at the foundation of building whatever is being built. I think for what we're doing with Be More Me, what makes it so powerful is that we are building, and we meaning they are building, student and teacher leaders through the work that we're doing that are then ambassadors for the work moving forward. The voice is not the district, it's the teachers and students who are doing the different parts of Be More Me. I will also say, and I know I've said this before, I think mindset work is really critical to this. We're really fortunate in my district to have the leadership of Dr. Santelises, who prioritizes this work, which is really the work of equity and in our district. And we have a brilliant Office of Equity who are partners with us in all the different and various pieces of Be More Me. And so, for example, all our students and teachers who are involved in building this initiative have training, for lack of a better word, in the courageous conversations about race protocol and using the compass from our Office of Equity, which really helps us have those conversations that Heather was talking about that are controversial, right? And I think that if I were in a district that didn't have that might, one of the first things I would do, I would be like Heather was saying, engaging in with the students and community members, but then also engaging in mindset work with districts, with leaders in the community and in the district and in the classroom and schools, because you can give a lot of opportunities for students to be heard, but if people aren't listening them, it really it doesn't move the needle very far. And so that's a critical part of it as well.
Awesome. Well, ladies, it sounds like we could have this conversation for a few more hours today, and I'm sure folks would love to continue to hear your insights, but this has been amazing. And I'm going to just quickly wrap us up before we head off. There have been so many critical takeaways from today's conversation. These are some of the ones I've captured from our previous conversations, but just want to recap some of the important things that I heard today. This idea of schools modeling democracy is so important, just as we think about getting students involved in democratic participation. How are our schools reflective of that? How are they creating systems and processes that are also democratic in order to really model those systems that we're seeking to create on a broader and bigger scale, and that we're asking students to participate in? How are we creating those experiences in our schools? Another thing I heard today was this idea of involving students, asking them for their opinion, but then being willing to take action on those opinions as well, because there is probably nothing more frustrating for a student than participating, getting involved, and then seeing no change at all and feeling powerless in that process. And loved the idea that you shared, Heather, of power over shifting to power with, and really seeing young people as assets. So thank you all again for sharing your critical perspectives there. I just want to close us out today by sharing a little bit about what's coming up next. We've got 2 more installments in this webinar series. In the next series, we'll hear from students and teachers who will share their experiences with different types of civic engagement. This webinar will take place at 4 p.m. Next Wednesday, in an opportunity to accommodate teacher and student working hours and schedules. We'll close out our series by returning to our lunchtime webinar, where you'll have the opportunity to hear more about how to get started doing this work. We'll hear from New York State Education Department's head of civic readiness, and learn a little bit more about the Democratic Knowledge Project coming out of Harvard University. And then we'll share some critical resources for folks who are looking to do this work and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us. We are excited that you all are here, and we hope to see you in the next installment of the series. Look out for an email on how to register. Thank you all so much.